All right, welcome back once again to the Grim Wisdom podcast. Idea, as always, is we're going to lay some ideas on you, and they're going to make you really uncomfortable and sad. With me today is my lovely wife, Jennifer.
Hello.
And my somewhat less lovely brother, Gavin.
Yo.
Gavin, particular point of pride to have him here today because we had to go rescue him from an island paradise and bring him to
That's right.
wonderful Rhode Island.
That's fine.
From one island to another. No.
Yes. I think it's sort of a fitting metaphor for our life because he was miserable in paradise when we brought him here to this crap hole, and he's happier. Less miserable.
Yeah, let's not use any extreme words.
Right. Let's not go putting words in people's mouths and, overstating the case. We all know that I'm not prone to exaggeration at all. So that was a joke.
Yes.
Really, I'm more like one of your regular listeners is all it is.
When you guys smirk at me, they can't hear it, so you need to make your smirks audible.
Verbalize my...
Right. You have to either laugh at me or you have to say smirk, right, so that they know.
Smirk.
Right.
Make a smirky comment.
Right. All right.
Let's get to it.
Yeah, let's get to it. So this, all the tomfoolery aside, this is, I think, it's been the first podcast we're doing for a long time, and I want it to be the most important one in a sense. We're going to discuss an idea today that I had that's sort of, I'm overstating it a little. I don't know how to put it, though, without putting it like this. It's like the culmination of all of the understanding and wisdom that I've gleaned up to this point in my life has led to me coming up with this idea, So, not that necessarily has any particular value, but if you happen to think that I have any understanding or wisdom to offer, then this is probably a good podcast you to tune into, because we're going to lay an idea on you that I've been working on for some months now, and that's really ties into a lot of different things that affect a lot of different places of our life. So what we're going to do is first I'm going to introduce the idea. We're going to do a little backwards order. I'm going to do the big reveal first. I'm going to explain the idea, and then we're going to talk about some less important things, some issues of the day that tie into the great idea before we finally circle back to the great idea. That'll give my guests here time to have it percolate, and for you, the listener, time to come up with ways to reject it immediately, because I'm sure you won't like it.
Can I digress for one moment?
No.
No?
I can refuse you nothing, Jennifer. Yes, go ahead, digress, please.
I want to say that you had not had a podcast since the election. Isn't that a momentous...
Right, this is momentous. You all should feel part of something very momentous right now. Do you feel momentized, Gavin? Yeah.
Smirk.
No, I'm so excited, and I just cannot hide it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, you can. You're doing a pretty good job right now. The reason for that is because I've always wanted this podcast to be about hope, which may surprise you, but the idea is that in discussing how difficult it is to have hope, we're really talking about how you can have hope in such a hopeless time, right? And if things are bad and all insights are grim, rather than having a false hope that is easy, we should strive for a true hope that is hard. It's been quite hopeless since the election. It's really, there's just been a lot going on, and it no longer seems fun or interesting to most of us to watch current events that closely, because there's a limit to how much we can even endure to engage with it. I think that's true. You can't see it, but they're both nodding.
Yeah.
So the point is, I wanted to stay away from the podcast until I had something to say that was worth listening to, that might give people some hope, however tenuous and limited. And also, too, I wanted to move away from what I had been doing, which was this tradition of talking about mainly current events in Rhode Island politics, because that just doesn't seem as relevant now as it did before the election, because current events are so horrible and difficult to engage with in any detailed or involved way. Like you turn on the TV and you're like, North Korea about to bomb us. Okay, all right, that's all I can handle.
Yep.
You turn on the TV again and it's like all the news outlets are like, oh, Trump looks presidential, just he bombed some random people in some fucking country. And we're like, oh, great, that's all I can handle. So I do have some hope to offer you, albeit of a grim nature. To get down to it, my great idea, unless either of you has another digression.
No,
I think we've talked about it a few times, but go right ahead.
Okay, yeah. I've prepped my podcast guests here with the great ideas so that they can have a time to come up with counterpoints and refinements. And one of the things, too, is whenever I would talk about this idea with Jennifer, my lovely wife, she would say, oh, you should write this down. These are good ideas. Nobody's saying these things, and you should put them out there. And I think, although, of course, as my wife, it's down in her contract, she must be loving and supportive.
Say that.
Right?
Yes.
She has to tell me I'm awesome, because that's
time.
what I need to hear, apparently. I've set out to write some of these things down a couple of times, and as you'll see, this is really an idea that would be best explored in detail in written form. It's tough when you're not a professional writer to spend a lot of time and effort writing something that you're not even sure if anybody will ever see, let alone how you'll capitalize or how you'll justify it, especially in our society today where you have to work all the time, just have enough money to exist. So it's been really tough. I've had a lot of false starts trying to write some of these ideas down. So hopefully this podcast will be a way to not only get the idea out there in a way that has fewer barriers than writing it all down at once, but it'll also be a stress test because my 10 listeners might hear the idea and they'll either like it or they'll hate it or they'll have feedback, and maybe they'll help me refine it and get it to the point where I can write it down. Maybe they'll help hassle me until I do write it down. So without further ado, here's the great idea. So we have this problem in our society that's hard to talk about. And it's multifaceted, and there's a lot of different ways that you can analyze it that are limited but that provide insight. So what we're going to be talking about today is in what we call capitalist societies, in this new modern world of ours where we're ruled by this thing called money. Problem, as I see it, is that money, or that thing that we call money, is serving three different roles. Money is a marker that we use as a medium of exchange. So if we want to trade one good for another, instead of just trying to use a barter economy where I have to find someone else in the world that wants my shoes and that has cheese to trade, we have this money, which is a medium of exchange, where we can all trade our shoes or cheese into money and then change them back into the other thing. And that makes for really efficient things called markets, which are efficient ways of allocating scarce resources based on individual preferences and desires. So markets are pretty good for that. But the problem is that this thing that we call money also serves two other purposes. It also serves as an indicator of capital, right? So if you have enough of this stuff built up in your bank account, then it earns you interest, and you can even invest it for passive income for which no work is done or required. And that's a problematic thing because capital is, of course, created by labor. The vast majority of capital that exists today is just handed from one large capitalist to another. They shuffle it between them using financial companies as intermediaries. Some is won or lost at times, but by and large, it's just transmitted along largely even hereditary lines or certainly class lines. So we have this function of capital that is harmful to our society, where this money is an indicator of capital. And third of all, it's an indicator of power. And when I mean power, there's a lot of definitions for power floating out there. We're talking about specifically political power. A working definition we can use today is think of power as the ability to get someone to do what you want regardless of their own interests or desires. So if I have the ability to impose my will on you, then I have power over you. And the more zeros in my bank account, it not only means that I can purchase more goods and services according to my preference, but it also means that I can draw a big passive income without ever having to work. And it also means that I can impose my desires on people against their will or their own desires because I have this large chunk of money. And those three functions, having those three functions be performed by one currency is highly problematic for a lot of reasons. And that's the thing that I want to talk about, how we're going to get beyond that, how we're going to essentially destroy capitalism or escape capitalism by breaking up the roles of money into three disparate instruments. So what do I mean by that? Well, imagine, if you will, we had two currencies, right? Instead of $1, we would have, say, credits and labors or whatever you want to call them. And the first form of money, if you will, is used in the way that we commonly understand as the original purpose of money, as a medium of exchange. So you have this thing that we call money, and maybe it's called dollars or credits, who cares? And we use that as a medium of exchange to create markets, because markets are very good at efficiently allocating scarce resources according to individual preference, right? I might be willing to eat X food at Y price, but not if the price was higher than Y, whereas you might like X food so much that she'll eat it even if the price is much higher than Y. And so because there's no way to find that kind of data on a mass scale and compile it, it's a total waste of time when we have the sort of elegant system of markets that can obtain that data for us and have it working on a day-to-day basis without needing a grand monitoring system to get that data. So you guys with me so far? Is there any interruptions or things you want to add, addendums?
Yeah, no, that's that.
No,
I'm with
that
you so
sounds
far.
good.
That's what
You got like kind of a glassy
That's-
look in your eyes, Gavin. Gavin's like waiting for me to get to the point.
Well, that's what we all understand money to be.
Right.
I think the next level is what you're going to, that's going to be different.
And Gavin made a good point the other day is he said that's the thing that we're taught to think that money is. When we're in school understanding what is the concept of money.
Yeah, in the school progression, the idea is that money is strictly the first one that you were discussing, where it's just a form of like trade to support markets, basically.
Right. And when you train children about it too, you give a child $1 and you explain to the child, oh, well, you can use it to buy this or that. And so they also come to understand money as if it's only the first function. Because the first function is very benign, and it's a very elegant solution to this real problem of human desire that can't really be easily satisfied through a barter system, and that if we try to go without economics, if we just use it like a gifting system where, oh, I make shoes all day long and then I give shoes to whoever wants them, then too much or not enough shoes get produced or not enough of the right kind of shoes get produced, right? So mass-scale systems that don't involve money, that try to accommodate human desires, just don't do it as elegantly as systems with money.
See, and even that is only glazed over in the education system right now. That's like a byproduct of the fact that money is just a unit of exchange, you know?
Right. So that function performed by this thing we call money. But this thing that we're going to call money in our thought experiment it can't be invested. It can't be, you can put it in your bank and you can hoard it if you want, because you might choose to buy more goods and services later rather than now. That would be, of course, your choice. But it can't earn interest. It can't be invested. It can't transform itself into capital is the key thing. The only way it can transform itself into capital is when you spend it, there'll be a system, and I'll get to the system in a minute, that will determine how that money is turned into capital. And we'll have a second currency that we'll call capital credits. And these capital credits, you can only obtain them through your labor.
An hour of your labor equals
some. We don't want to get rung up on units, right? So we could say an hour of your labor equals one capital credit, but that wouldn't actually be the way the system would be structured. Instead, we would say, okay, there's some occupations for which build little capital and which are not heavily desired by the society, right? And so those occupations, while you'll still get capital laboring at those occupations, you'll mostly be paid in money. Right? You'll be paid in the ability to leverage goods and services. Think of, back rubs or kisses or something simple, something transactional like that, right? Well, we might all want to buy kisses or back rubs, but they don't build capital for our society. If I produce a kiss today, I haven't improved my ability to produce a kiss tomorrow. Maybe in some abstract sense I have. So we would pay kiss peddlers some small amount of capital because
I think sticking with the back rubs one was better.
Sure, fine. Back rub peddlers.
It's easier to understand, I think.
We pay back rub peddlers. I don't know why, but fine.
massage.
Massage therapists.
There you
we
go.
could just say sex workers. It's fine. Anyway,
No.
so we pay the back rub peddler something, and in capital, right? But most of their income would come in terms of money. Would come in terms of the thing that they can spend on immediate goods and services to get their needs fulfilled. And that might mean that they can lead a very relatively high lifestyle while they're giving back rubs, especially if back rubs are highly desired by the community, right? But because they're not building capital, then they're not really receiving that much capital. They're not accumulating that much in their capital account. And then you would say, well, why do we want to prejudice the economy against back rubs? Well, that leads us to our third thing, which is power. I think we can all agree here in this room, at least, that power, as I've defined it, is inherently evil. It's inherently corrosive to freedom and to a society where people can feel happy and fulfilled. Because
I think everybody pretty much agrees that the whole power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely thing.
Oh, I'd say so, but I'm trying to keep my definitions narrow because I want it to be want this argument to be.
But certainly the power in the sense that you're describing is just that's
Right.
folly of basically every government form that people hate and all these dictators and stuff. That's their basis of power, right there. Is
Right.
what you're describing.
So we don't want to have any ability, or want to have it as limited as possible, of my ability to impose my will upon you, to force you to do what I want, right?
yeah,
So the way we get around that is to make a third currency for power. We just get rid of it altogether, or to the greatest extent possible. And we do that by democratizing all decisions. Now, the word democracy is also one of these terms that you've been brought up to think is wrong. And this is where we get a little bit science fiction here, because in the Matrix, everybody's in the Matrix, but nobody knows they're in the Matrix. Their entire world is a computer simulation designed to exploit and enslave them. And that's science fiction. But in our world, we all have been told from the beginning that we live in a democracy. All of our culture, all of our popular culture that displays democracy always shows elected representatives. It always shows a republic. A republic in this context being defined as a system by which the people, however you define the people, elect leaders, and then the leaders make all the important decisions. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I think people do realize the difference between a full democracy and a republic. But you're right that we don't talk about it in the media. We don't make a distinction between what we do have, which is more a republic than a full democracy.
Right.
But
Right, and I think
people do know that.
it's not just in the media, although the media is the best place to see it, because you'll see other Western democracies, developed Western democracies, as if it was a real thing, when in reality there are no large-scale democracies in the world. There are only republics. Yeah. And the degree to which the republics allow for popular participation in important decision-making varies somewhat, but is always limited. So, for example, let's look at Great Britain, right? Great Britain has some process by which the people can impose their will on elected officials to exit the European Union, right? So there was this Brexit vote, and a lot of people voted no. And without getting drawn into a big debacle, I suspect that the main reason they voted to vote Brexit is just because they were totally disgusted with their leaders, and they wanted to put their thumb in their eyes. Because that's their only chance to do anything to override the desires of the leaders is in their occasional national referendum.
I think you're seeing that as a reoccurring trend worldwide at this point.
Yes.
With these, like, democratic republic, I don't know how you call them, democratic republic, I guess is the term that I was always taught.
Well, I wouldn't
describe it, because it is like, there's just a hint, just like a little, like sprinkle of democracy on top of the republic,
Well,
I wouldn't call them a democratic republic, because I think that the fundamental thing that would make it a democracy is the people get to participate in important decisions that affect their lives. And the fundamental thing that makes it a republic is that the people only get to elect elites who make all the important decisions.
Well,
so
I think
to me,
that's...
in this construction, a democratic republic wouldn't make any sense. It would be like saying a free dictatorship. It's a contradiction in terms, because if you're electing an elite to make all your important decisions for you, then by definition, you're not making the important decisions. I'm just saying that's the term
that was always thrown around. Right. Whereas a true democracy, I mean, I was taught in school the difference between a republic and a democracy, and a true democracy, as they call it. So that way they could say, but our democracy is special and magic because it's not a democracy.
It's a republic. So Jennifer's waiting to talk.
Thanks. I think that people make the argument that we have to have a republic because of the speed of making decisions. Like if everybody was involved, for instance, in Massachusetts, they have town meeting. And town meeting, they can't get a lot of things done. But that's digression.
Actually,
and
no,
I think what you had said to me previously was that with technology that we have now, we can have a full democracy because it's easier to make decisions more quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
I think you're helping him step up to the next point here.
Right. And that's the next thing I was going to say, which is that, yes, now we have a technology that was not imagined even 50 years ago. We have a technology that makes us all part of a global digital community where through the magic of the internet, I love that phrase, through the magic of the internet, we can connect more or less instantaneously with anyone on the planet who's hooked up to the internet. And it doesn't cost very much to gain an entry device to the internet. Modern smartphones don't cost very much, especially if you get ones that are a few generations old, but have the ability to access the internet. You can get plans. In America, they're more expensive than they are in other places, but you can get plans relatively cheaply that allow you to access the internet either on an a la carte basis or on a periodic monthly subscription basis. And even in poorer societies, they have internet cafes, and they have some access to the internet that is open to the people, right? So in a sense, we're already part of this global community, and none of us get to have our decisions heard. And in fact, that pace of decision-making, that argument that democracy just takes too long, ignores the fact that that's primarily a feature of republics, is that republics are totally unresponsive and unproductive. Like if you look at our Congress, what's the number one complaint that, well, many Americans have about Congress is they don't do a damn thing. And that's because, and it's easy to understand from this analysis, why Congress would be predisposed to do nothing ever, because they're an elite, right? So their interests are only very slightly overlapping with the interests of the masses. So, for example, if I'm a rich white guy from a rich white family, to me, important priorities involve the estate tax, tax planning, they involve business regulation, right? They involve civil defense, which is a bit of an overlapping thing. Although even in civil defense, my interests are opposed to the masses, right? When it comes to having the country be defended militarily, as a member of the elite, my priority is to protect my business interests at home and abroad, and to protect the lives of people in my class, but not necessarily the lives of my colleagues generally. I don't care about the masses. Somebody's got to fight in wars, and that's what the peons are for.
Yeah, I think
right?
civil defense is already a misnomer because of that.
Well, and that's right, exactly. So I might say, oh, it's an act of war because they've bombed an American company overseas.
Exactly.
Right? They've bombed my business interests. We have to go to war for that. Oh, in fact, we do hear people say things like that. When in reality, the masses, Americans, they don't see why that would be an act of war unless it occurred on American soil and American lives were actually lost. Because to us, to the masses, we care about civil defense and the fact that we want to be safe in our homes, want to feel safe and secure in our daily lives. Our business interests are our secondary concern. We're more afraid of our business interests being threatened by global capitalism, a financial collapse causing our bank accounts to disappear.
Well, I think what was interesting, you had told me before about why you think that republics are slower. This representative government is slower. Can you explain more about that?
So, in democracies, let me give you an example of something. This isn't a perfect example, but it's a familiar one, so that's why I'm bringing it up. We had a thing called prohibition here in the U.S. For a good period of time. It was illegal to have alcohol, and then it was perfectly legal again. And the interesting thing was, this was the response to democratic rather than republic governance, right? What happened was, in 1920 specifically, women got the right to vote. And that meant that a whole new group of people was entering the pool from which elites would be selected. And this whole new group of people with potentially very divergent interests to the existing power structure wanted to flex their muscles. And so they did it by circumventing the republic, by going around the nonsense of elected officials and getting the Constitution amended. Because the Constitutional Amendment, although it's extremely difficult to do and requires a huge groundswell effort in many states, right? A constitutional amendment does not require the Congress to sign off on it. They don't have anything to say about it, right? They can't nix it. I mean, they can do some things to suggest it, but they can't nix it, and they can't make it happen either. They don't have the authority to amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's not part of their purview. So what happens is, to get prohibition enacted, they went on to all the states, and they had this massive groundswell of public opinion across the country to get liquor banned. And they did it because they wanted to flex their muscles. They wanted to show their democratic power and get the elites to start courting their votes, right? Because, of course, many of those same elites had previously opposed women having votes.
Well, because the people voting got flooded, with women. Mm-hmm. They basically doubled
right.
what was previously.
So now what happened, of course, in the long run is that prohibition turned out not to be such a good idea. And so then we used democracy to unmake it. We re-amended the Constitution to get rid of prohibition. So we entirely circumvented the machinery of the Republic. In a sense.
A big part of the prohibition problem, from what I understand, and this may or may not be as close to the truth, is that it created the whole organized crime thing, or at least empowered them by giving all that money that, as we said before, has the three functions in American society.
Yes.
Gives all that money and power over to this particular group of people who are willing to break the law and change this whole...
Well, it's interesting because the shuffling of the elites isn't always a bad thing, but I'm arguing there shouldn't be elites, right? So right now there's this whole family called the Kennedys, and they don't produce anything of value. They're total parasites on the body politic. As near as I can tell, all they ever do is get drunk and act irresponsibly and inherit money and run for office. But they espouse relatively progressive values, and they've not been a bad set of elites from the perspective of most liberals and progressives, because they tend to align with our social policy goals, even though there shouldn't be elites. Like, you shouldn't have this power and this capital, period, let alone from exploiting prohibition. But regardless of whether the reasons why prohibition was repealed, the point I'm trying to make is when women wanted to flex their muscles, they didn't bother going to their congressman, right?
Yeah.
They went to the people.
Do you have an example of the opposite of I'm trying to think of some issue that's been clogged up forever. All I can think of is healthcare.
There are so many issues.
Right.
There's so many,
yeah,
that are clogged up forever.
Think about Clinton.
Well,
Bill Clinton.
Under Obama didn't even sign all that many executive orders. It's a misnomer, but Congress did virtually nothing during their Obama said they didn't even do their Constitution-required duties. They didn't even meet the minimum necessary standard.
Explain in your theory.
Yeah, they shirked even the constitutional stuff.
Why does this happen? So the elites do not. I would say maybe the elites are in bed with the people making money, the insurance companies, I imagine, that are making money off the healthcare.
Well, yes and no. So it's complicated. So with healthcare, if you want to use that as an example. So with healthcare, first of all the elites all have healthcare, period. So
they don't give
it's not a pressing concern to them, right? Everybody in their class, by virtue of membership in the class, has great healthcare. In fact, from them, when they go on TV and say America has the greatest healthcare in the world, they mean it because that's their experience. Because in America, if you can afford it, we have the greatest healthcare in the world, right? Now, for the masses, it's terrible. Their experience is completely different from ours, which is where simple operations, basic prescription medications cost many times as much here as they do elsewhere. But at the elites, they don't care. They have good insurance and they can afford the copays. The lens from which we view healthcare is very different than the elites, right? First of all, the main concern to most Americans actually was not access to healthcare, although that was a big concern. The main concern to most Americans was price. It was always price. Right? American healthcare is too expensive. Now, if you didn't have healthcare, that was a terrible travesty, right? That was a tragedy. But most Americans had access to healthcare. It was just ludicrously expensive and unreliable. It would drop you the instant you filed a claim. When we entered the healthcare debate, most Americans are primarily concerned about cost. But cost is a much more thorny issue than access, right? Comparatively speaking, because the elites don't want to be seen as heartless, even though they are. And some of them actually, through the limited blinders of their position, they actually care about the lower classes. So their perspective was, well, our primary focus should be focused on access. How do we gain access to as many people as possible? And that was also controversial because the elites are like, well, we should have access, but our taxes shouldn't go up for any reason, ever. So as long as we make exchanges where people can buy insurance if they can afford it, then that will solve the problem. Then, of course, the obviousness of the fallacy there is that the lower income people can't afford exchanges because they can't afford insurance. So Medicaid had to be expanded, which was, by the way, the only really progressive thing apart from some small reforms which everyone agreed were good ideas, limiting insurance companies' ability to just kick you off the instant you file a claim, making sure that your kids can stay on your insurance, etc., etc. Those kind of issues are popular because they're also issues for the elites, right? Even a member of the elite, even somebody in the lower upper class.
So, okay, well, we're saying that these are the issues of why healthcare doesn't change. In your view, democracy, if you had full democracy, we could implement...
Exactly. If we had full democracy, people would never permit insurance companies to overcharge for medication. They simply wouldn't allow it, right?
It's true.
So
you wouldn't have $700, what was it, the EpiPens?
Right. It simply wouldn't happen. Nobody is on board with that. Nobody's on board with that. And the only reason that it still exists is because the elites constantly insist to the peons like us, we know better. If we fix this problem, it would cause more problems to solve. Same thing with drug reimportation from Canada and a whole host of other things, is that massive majorities of people support them, but the elites don't. The elites like the system the way it is because it functions for them. Or if they see that there's a problem, it's an abstract low priority to them. High priority problems to them are, as I've said, the estate tax, things that threaten their business interests overseas, worker protections and making sure that we don't have them, all those sorts of things. Right, and that's what the elites want.
Well,
and so,
this is what I think would scare people about full democracy. And we can talk about this. People believe what is something that we, I think progressives don't believe.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we have to stop here for a second because I think we've come a little far ahead of the listener. I want to make sure the listener's on the same page as us.
Sure.
So full democracy is as opposed to the republic. In a republic, every few years, you have high-stakes elections where you pick which members of the elite are going to rule your lives. They're going to make all the important decisions about your life, except those that are reserved for your employer. We have that's the republic. That's what we have here.
Yeah.
A democracy is one where the people collectively make all the important decisions themselves. So instead of saying, oh, well, here's a health care bill, and the Congress people, all the elites are going to fight with their little egos and the local priorities, we're going to put a healthcare bill app on everybody's phone. Everybody's going to be issued a phone. We're all going to have access in the morning. Every morning you're going to wake up and you're just going to have a list of things that are like important to society today, and you're going to vote on them, right? You're going to say, okay, we should have this, we should do this, this, and this. We shouldn't do this. And you can do that every day, in the society that I've constructed. And as for the phone, it's easy enough to issue everybody a phone with access to the internet and to design secure apps to do these things. We have secure apps that allow you to pay, to summon a cab driver to anywhere and to pay him securely. So we should have secure apps that allow you to vote securely online. It shouldn't be too much of a problem. So that's what we mean by direct democracy. We're talking about digital direct democracy that was never available to humans before. The technology to do this didn't exist, and so the ancient thinkers couldn't really have conceived of it.
Yeah,
even the great science fiction authors of the early to mid 20th century didn't really conceive of this. They weren't focused on that because they were all raised in a republic, and they can't see a distinction between democracy and republic because they've been conditioned not to see one.
I've never seen a science fiction novel even where they theorized of the ability for everybody to simultaneously communicate on an issue, but also the access to information that everybody has at the same time. That's something that people just even today can't conceive of, and we have it.
Right.
It's a lot. It's a lot of power.
So when I'm talking about democracy as a system that we use to implement decisions, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about everybody.
Right.
Convicts, children to some extent, to whatever extent we can figure out a way to do it without it being perverted by their parents. But everybody has access to voting. Everybody gets to participate in civic decisions every day.
That's what I was thinking about when we discussed that before was there's this really mistaken understanding of what government is and how government works, to where there's a large portion of people that I know, at least in America, that have nothing but hate and bile and complete in a misunderstood way towards government. Like anything that the government does is just evil and they can't touch anything. And in order to have that type of a system, you would have to have at least a distribution network and set up for for the information and for the devices.
Yeah, it would be a culture change. I
It
mean,
would be.
they really
It would require a
started
large
with
culture
Reagan.
change, is what I'm saying.
Well, you're
Like government is government isn't the solution. The government is the problem.
well. I wouldn't say it started with Reagan. It started a long time before that. But
But I'm
guys
not
are
talking about when it
you
started.
guys
I'm
are
talking about
leaping.
finishing it.
Yeah.
You guys are leaping ahead in the conversation because we will get there, and I have thought about those
Okay.
issues. But I wanted to define the democracy that we're talking about for the
that was
listener.
a good definition.
Right.
Yes.
So the listener now understands what we're serving up as a form of governmental decision making, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were asking a question when I interrupted you so rudely about how are democracies faster? Because the fear, and I think I knew where you were going. The fear is that lots of progressives have this fear that when you allow the masses to rule, that they might make bad decisions.
Because a lot of people grew up in the culture that government is bad, so there might be a majority of people that say, hey, let's just let the reins go. Like, say minimum wage. I think most people would actually agree that we should have a minimum wage.
Well,
it
understand,
should be higher.
minimum wage is a special issue because minimum wage ties directly into...
But say people voted, we're going to get rid of the complete minimum wage.
But Jennifer, you can't use the minimum wage as an example.
Well, then give me
because the
another
minimum
example.
wage wouldn't apply to a system where we've transformed money into labor credits and money credits.
My
right?
point,
So you can't talk about the minimum wage in that context because if we're using a futuristic decision method but an arcane money, then we're going to revert to the old system.
Let me say something crazy. All right, genital mutilation.
Right.
We're going to allow genital mutilation because it's a religious choice and people should make it. Say the majority decided this was okay.
Okay.
And we're horrified as
Right.
progressives that this is...
That's a good example.
Okay.
So here's the answer. Either you believe that human beings are capable of self-governance or you don't. If human beings aren't capable of self-governance, why do we even dick around with any of this stuff? What does any of this matter? If human beings aren't collectively capable of making good decisions, then there isn't any hope for our species.
This is
because if we already know, we have abundant evidence that individuals, elites, no matter how intelligent and compassionate they are, elites are not qualified to make decisions for all of us in the modern era. They simply, no one human being can process the immense complexity and hazard of modern existence.
Well, that's something I've been thinking about for a
if
while.
individuals can't govern us, we know that individuals can't govern us. And you're suggesting that the masses can't be trusted to govern us.
Well, that's why we have republics.
What do
I mean, that's
we want to be
reason.
enslaved to sentient robots? We have republics, but we have republics because of that idea that you're talking about, right?
I think she was suggesting that as one of the hindrances towards that type. And that's something I've thought about a lot, is that I skirt the edge. I'm not 100% sure humans are capable of self-governance.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm on that side of the fence, I mean, the only possible conclusion is, well, I guess what we're doing is kind of working and it's better than nothing. And that's not a good mentality to have, but that's where you end up if you're on that
But
side
if that's
of the fence.
if that's the answer,
let me-
then you may as well let me try my experiment.
Exactly.
I agree. But it gets back to expertise. For instance, there might be somebody who tells you climate change. We are not scientists. We did not research climate science, but we believe in scientists. Say there's something that an expert knows, but the masses don't believe. Actually, you go back to the world is flat.
Right, so the world is flat. So
Right.
how do you deal with the problem of human ignorance? Broadly defined. Right. So that's what you're trying to get
Yes,
at.
that's
Okay.
what I'm trying to get at.
Here's the way you deal.
Group of flat earthers nowadays. So.
Which is
Here's the way you deal with the problem of human ignorance, right?
Okay.
So there's basically two problems that we have to address here, or we'll never solve anything. We have to address the problem of evil, and we have to address the problem of ignorance. So right now we're talking about the problem of ignorance. We'll get to evil later. So ignorance. Now, ignorance means I am well-meaning. I'm not evil. I want the best for everybody and myself. Right? Mainly myself, but also everybody. But I just don't know what that is. And that's the whole point of democracy, is the idea is that collectively we have more wisdom than any one of us has on their own. So the idea being, if you accept that premise, then that problem of ignorance gets slowly washed away. There will be big, large-scale mistakes like prohibition when you have direct democracy. There's no way around it, right? The only way that you can solve that problem is to allow for those things to be self-correcting. So, like, let's say that we do something like genital mutilation. Everybody votes for it. Genital mutilation is a ridiculous
crazy,
thing.
yes.
But it's a ridiculous thing to say because Americans don't support genital mutilation.
Right.
So
right.
pick something
Well,
ridiculous.
that's what I'm trying to say.
Pick something ridiculous that might actually manage to eke out a majority in America, like abortion should be illegal. So let's say that abortion should be illegal. No one should be able to get an abortion.
Right.
Right? Well, if we did that vote today, let's just pretend, although it wouldn't actually happen, because the majority of Americans are pro-choice, but pro-choice voters aren't allowed to vote, right, in a lot of ways.
Right.
So
say 51%.
Say 51% said, let's get rid of abortion altogether. Well, you set up algorithms at the start, or rule decision trees when you're designing this system. And I don't need to have them all pre-built. I only need to show that they can be made. We can all collectively work out what the rules could be. But let's say the rules say, hey, this is a big decision that's going to affect a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It's going to affect their civil rights, and it's a very contentious issue, right? It's a very small majority. So the majority has to rule. Otherwise, what's the point of democracy? But the issue can be revisited in X amount of time. And then 6 months later, abortion's been illegal for 6 months, and you've had that time to convince people, look, it's horrible. Right. You know, and like, you just got to believe that if you do these iterations enough, if you set the rule system up enough, that human beings are capable of correcting each other's ignorance over time through our collective wisdom. If you don't believe that, then you're saying that humans aren't capable of self-governance. Because I assure you, you've been taught to believe that. You've been taught to be afraid of that. And maybe it is a legitimate fear, I don't know. Right? But the reason you've been taught to believe that is that if you believe that, then you'll just slavishly go along with the idea of the republic, with the idea of appointing elites. And those elites don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. Don't. Right? Look at George W. Bush, who not only shouldn't have gotten into Yale, couldn't pass Yale, right? Can't find his ass, he can't find his dick with both hands and a flashlight, right? But the guy is so dim. But he got to be president of the United States, and we don't even talk about George Bush. Look at Donald Trump and any of these other people, right?
That's exactly what I was describing, is that if you're on that side of that argument, or you think that people just aren't smart enough or aren't good enough, then what we're having is probably better than experimenting around. Like that's the mindset, is because, oh, well, I'm doing okay. I think everybody's stupid, and if we change anything, it just gives them a chance to screw it up.
Well, that's a little different, though. That's psychological inertia, and that's not a problem as such, but it's a problem for the inception of a new system. It's not a fundamental problem for the provability of the system. See what I mean?
That's true.
So, like, when we move on to the inception of the system, like, what are the roadblocks we meet immediately? I have some things to say about that, too. And that is one of them. But right now, we're just talking about, could the system ever work for people? Right? And the first problem is the problem of ignorance, right? If human beings are ignorant, right, which they are, we're all born morons. So, if human beings are ignorant...
Empty vessel.
Right?
To say it.
Tabula rasa. Yeah.
Exactly. See.
So, if we are collectively too ignorant to govern ourselves, then there's no hope for governance until we devise a sentient machine to take care of us. So until we devise a machine that's smarter than us, right? Well, which is what the witnesses believe. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that human beings are fundamentally ungovernable, and that's why they refuse to participate in elections, because they think, well, only God can govern humans. Humans aren't smart enough to do it. I'm oversimplifying.
Yeah, well,
no, you're oversimplifying, but that is.
But you can see where they come from.
Yes,
you can see where they're coming from. So the point is, unless you want to convert and become a witness, then.
You should try this experiment.
Then you have to take it on faith that the problem of human ignorance might be a soluble one. It might be one that can be solved. And if it could be solved, then clearly the best way we have to go about it is by sharing our collective wisdom, which I'm doing now with this podcast to the 10 listeners. But which I would prefer to do in a dynamic, digital, democratic society where I, as well as everybody else, get to vote and comment on important issues all the time.
Well, I hope a lot of people comment on this when you post it.
One would hope. So, that's the problem of ignorance. The problem of evil is also a problem for inception, but it's also a problem in the abstract. And the problem of evil is one that doesn't get discussed enough in in these theoretical discussions. Jennifer had me read a book not too long ago, some excerpts from a book not too long ago, where the guy was talking about economic business cycles and the cycle of boom and bust, and how private versus state capitalism, and how, in the last financial crisis, the government wrote all these big checks to the big banks where they were too big to fail, but then it refused to acknowledge the obvious conclusion, which is if the banks are too big to fail, they should be broken up.
Flawed.
Right.
Obviously.
So it was a good book, but it didn't count on the problem of human evil, because it was serving up this alternative methodology of worker-owned businesses, which I think is a good thing to do. I think that in our system, where money is a stand-in for all these three different things, having the workers own the means of production distributes the power amongst them and also distributes the capital amongst them. So that's as good as you can get under capitalism. But the problem of evil arises if you are too successful within the system at building worker-built co-ops, and people start thinking, oh, maybe we don't have to have capitalists, maybe if the free city of Marine succeeds, it proves that no one needs a master. Well, they can't have that, right? And so they'll do what Jimmy Carter did to the steel industry. The steel workers' unions said, we can revitalize the steel industry. We will make it secure forever. We'll make it American forever, and all the workers will own it. And all we need are a few $1 million of loan guarantees.
Which he was going to give, but then
the elites talked him out of it. And he eventually said no.
And we all love Jimmy Carter, but...
Well, we all like Jimmy Carter, okay. He's an okay president.
He was the best by far ex-president. I mean, still, as an old man, is building houses with his bare hands.
I'm not saying that. So. This isn't about whether or not Jimmy Carter was a good guy.
I was saying more he's just a good guy, nothing about his presidency.
The point is that in the financial crisis, they were happy to write loan guarantees, whatever it took, of a magnitude that dwarfed the steel workers' ask. But when the steel workers said, hey, we're going to take a major American industry and preserve it, but under the auspices of being worker-owned, capitalists couldn't have that. They couldn't have that. It was much better to let the steel industry die and move it all to China than it was to give anybody the idea that they didn't need owners.
Yeah.
So that's the problem of evil. The problem of evil is if I want to hurt other people, or if I am actively opposed to their interests, or I'm happy to...
or I have more power than others.
Well, power allows for evil to reach its culmination. So the existence of power allows for expressions of evil that didn't exist. But evil is inherent. And I could argue with the podcast listeners who think that evil can be trained out of people. But I think that the three of us here at the table agree that evil is a part of your constitution. It's a part of your makeup.
It could be allowed to flourish or diminish.
Right.
But it is in there.
But it's in there. You'll never wipe out the problem of evil. Because I can take a child and I can educate them, right? I can, at least in the abstract, in principle, I can educate the ignorance right out of a person.
In abstract.
Right? In the abstract, right? In reality, it's a devilishly thorny problem. But there's nothing inherently ignorant about our nature, hopefully. Mm-hmm. I just almost take that on faith. Human beings aren't intrinsically ignorant. We're just born ignorant. But we're also born with a hunger to learn.
Yes,
right?
I believe
a hunger
that's
to be cured of our ignorance. So that we can hope to get rid of. But the problem of evil...
What do we hope to get rid of?
Well, I don't know how far I can go on that one.
We can hope to get rid of...
I think there are people, I think some people do tend towards ignorance and, ignorance is bliss kind of mentality. I think that is also something that some people do.
Well,
I do think that evil is inherent in human nature in some aspects.
Be that as it may, in our society, you'll be allowed to be ignorant. It'll just be that nothing encourages you to be ignorant. So if you don't participate in the political process, right, if you choose not to vote every morning, nobody's going to hurt you. It's not going to make you suffer. But all sorts of things are going to happen to you all the time are in and around you that you'll have no say in and no understanding of, right? But if you're okay with that, if your ignorance is valuable enough to you that you prefer not to be part of political decision-making, not to educate yourself on why today this industry is favored and tomorrow it's not, then that'll be your right. But if you ever want to exercise power over your own destiny, then you'll always have those tools.
I'm just
right
saying
now,
that type of person does exist.
Right now, people are encouraged in their ignorance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because ignorance can be exploited by elites. Because if
Yes,
I make
very
you
much
if
so.
I make you and everyone around you ignorant, and then I tell you humans are too ignorant to govern themselves, give all the power to an elite, well, it sounds a lot more plausible. So ignorance, maybe we can solve the problem of ignorance. I mean, it'll always be an issue, but it doesn't test the boundaries of what we do the way evil does. Because the desire for me to fuck you over and take what I want, rather than, help you and sacrifice, rather than be altruistic, right? That is, to some degree, inherent in the human psyche. I believe, and you guys believe, even if the podcast listener doesn't. So how do we deal with the problem of evil? Well, the ongoing problem of evil, we're going to need to have rules in place that limit evil's expression. By and large, you can't exploit the system easily, right? If it's robust enough. If we have systems where money, this medium of exchange, is not controlled by a central bank, but is instead created when you labor and destroyed when you purchase, right? If instead money is this thing that we create temporarily as a medium of exchange, and there's no power associated with it, then there's no need to exploit the right.
Yeah.
And as for capital, right, the system will always allow for exploits that allow you to gain capital more easily than somebody else is gaining capital. There won't be any way around that. The system will always have to be dynamically adjusting.
Well, we talked about, that capital could be used just for things that are necessary, like shelter, food, education. But then we also said, what happens if you're disabled?
But right now we're talking about the problem of evil.
Okay.
So
back to evil.
The problem. So in my system, as I envision it, right, we'll find tasks, and we'll collectively find ways to assign a capital value to those tasks, right? So let's say that the people in this municipality decide we want to build a big skyscraper, so we're going to assign a higher capital value to skyscraper builders to induce people to come here to be skyscraper builders, right? Well, a cunning, evil person could exploit that system by sitting every day and thinking, like, what's the most capital efficient job that I can plausibly present myself as being qualified for, right? And go there and do a shitty job and get more capital, right? But remember, capital still isn't power. Capital doesn't permit you to impose your will on others. Capital only allows you to not work and have a passive income, right? Or to achieve, the benefits of capital in our society, which is that, it's money that's invested, where you earn an income on it, you have a passive income, so you can lead a lifestyle without having to actively work for it anymore, right? So if an evil person exploits the system to get too much capital by creating and then exploiting temporary flaws, we can live with that, as long as we have a system that'll address those flaws, so they don't become systemic, because temporary imbalances of capital get addressed eventually by the reaper.
Right.
And because capital doesn't translate to power, what can an evil person do with a lot of capital?
There will be no inheritance of capital.
Right. Well, of course not, because you have to earn the capital by your labor. You can leave as much money as you want to your kids, although we should probably vote on whether we want to subtly discourage that through inflation and so forth. But you can leave as much money as you want. If you want to wear a hair shirt so your children can lead a high lifestyle, that's up to you, right? But remember, money isn't capital. Money doesn't allow you to produce this income. So sooner or later, that money will get spent. And once it's spent, it's spent. So, and your capital dies with you. I think that the system actually manages to self-correct for evil pretty well. Because we have these constant things, democracy is actually better at watchdogging evil than any other possible form of government, because most people aren't evil. I mean, most people have some evil in them, but most people aren't dominated by evil thoughts.
Right.
Most people want the collective to be successful. They want everybody to be happy. They're not malign. So
we'd live in a different world.
I'd like to
if
think
that
so.
were true, we would live in a different world. So, I mean, it would be even more evil than it is. So most people are good.
Right. Or are by default neutral or good, right? The good predominates, but the evil can prevail, right? And the problem is that power is a tool that can only really be used for evil ends, right? So we need to get rid of power. We need to disperse power.
It's too tempting.
It's too tempting. It's inherently corruptive, as Gavin says.
Yeah.
So So we've addressed these two great problems that I see in the human makeup, which is ignorance and evil, for our system. We've at least gone so far in showing in the abstract that it could exist. Would you guys agree with that?
No, I think so.
So now we have to ask the question of how do we get there, and we have to do it in 5 minutes because we took.
I think the next podcast we can do that.
Well, we can do that, but let's introduce a few quick ideas before we sign off. One thing that I thought about was lately, Gavin and I and Jennifer, we're all big Star Trek fans. We're all science fiction guys, and a lot of my thinking is influenced by science fiction. And Jennifer, I've had her reading this book about the mirror universe in Star Trek. But there's a great line in it where these two revolutionaries are discussing rebellion, or the republic they want to set up to replace the empire that rules them. And one of them says to the other, the duties of self-government will be unfamiliar to the people, right? Mm-hmm. You can establish a republic, but you'll never keep it because people aren't used to having civic responsibilities. And there'll be outside forces that want to destroy the republic, and they will, right? Because the people won't fight to defend rights they don't understand have value yet. And that's a problem for our system as well, because if we try to impose this system whole scale, or if we try to do it on a broad basis, then most Americans would have no idea. They would think, oh, I have to vote every day. What a pain in the ass. Because in America right now, voting is a pain in the ass, right?
Yeah.
You know,
with very few exceptions.
Checking your Facebook is easy, right?
But voting is
hard. But what if voting were just as easy as checking your Facebook and it allowed you to exercise power over your life? Well, then you probably vote every day.
You log into your voting machine and it just gives you the notifications like Facebook, but there are notifications on the various votes you need to make.
Right.
Like,
yeah, that's pretty sweet.
And you'd have the ability to...
Everybody would do that.
Yeah.
Right. But only if we got together a group of people that wanted to do it that way. Because at the outset, if I tried to pitch this to the country as a whole, the elites would never permit it. Because they're like, no, democracy is terrible, voting is hard. You need to find elites to rule you.
And it's too slow, even though we've proposed the whole system of electronics.
Even though we've established that it's extremely fast and responsive.
Exactly.
They'll say that it's slow or whatever, right? They won't care about truth or falsehood. They'll just try to subvert it. So that is a problem.
Yeah.
And so that means that if we're going to do this, we'd have to do it on a small scale for people that opted in. So the second problem is, what do you do with people who lose a vote over and over again? What if I feel very strongly about something, and I keep bringing it up, but I keep getting defeated? Right?
Tyranny of the majority.
The tyranny of the majority, right? So,
and you're in the minority. And what do you do?
And you're in the minority. Well, to some extent, we have to hope that'll be solved by curing ignorance, right? So to some extent, we'll have to hope that problem will be resolved by the system that I've set up here, right? Mm-hmm. But you're always going to have people who have these legitimate disagreements. So what do? Well, let's say that I am insistent. I really, really, really think that there should be...
I know.
There should be female genital mutilation. Right? I doubt you'd find female genital mutilation.
I brought it up.
You said it. I'm saying.
Yeah. So female genital mutilation is a regional problem in Africa, and I doubt you'd find even less than 1% of Americans would probably be down.
Yeah, it's a regional problem.
But let's just say there was an issue like that was shocking to the majority, but that a strong minority wanted. Or to put it another way, let's say that I wanted to legalize certain kinds of sex acts or certain kinds of sex work. Well,
which is kind of
which is controversial.
That's a bad example.
I do a vote and I get voted down, and the system says, okay, based on the margin, you have this long again until you can bring the issue up again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after that margin, I bring it up again, and I'm defeated by a wider margin.
Yeah.
Right?
What's going on?
So clearly people are not being convinced of my position. Well then, if I keep doing this under a number of times, I can either submit to the superior wisdom of the group, right, having had my say multiple times. Because remember, I'm just some chump, but I can still propose legislation that everybody has to vote on or gets to vote on, on this timetable, right? So
maybe people will break up.
So I won't feel disempowered. I'll feel that I have this chance to get my say heard, right? But let's say that I keep repeating it. So then we say, okay, well, we scale it down and we do an experiment. So let's say that my municipality wants to build I call them human hives. Like you build a huge skyscraper, and inside that skyscraper are all the services that people need on a daily basis, right? So in that skyscraper is a school and a grocery store,
an apartment area,
right?
Yeah.
And most people that live there don't ever have to leave the apartment building.
Yes.
So I want to do that. And I really think that's just the best way for humans to be happy. But most people are like, no, the best way for humans to be happy is to live in single-family homes, dumbass. Right. So we vote on it over and over again, and nobody goes along with it, right? Well, then maybe I'd say, okay, but it seems as this core group of voters. If it's only me, well, then I'm going to have to give up at some point. Right. But if it's me and a core of voters, I say, well, let's scale it down. Let me get the group. Let me propose this thing that we try this on a trial basis. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, I'm never going to sign off on human hives for everybody. But it might be good. Might be good to try in a trial municipality, right? So I put forth a thing to scale it down or scale it back, and you can do that with cultural things too, like. Let's say that I really think that God should be taught in schools, right? And everybody thinks it's a terrible idea. Okay, well, if I keep trying to have my core of supporters, then you go to your schools and you try it, right? We'll see if that actually helps, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem there, of course, is that they're fostering ignorance in a lot of those cases, but that'll become obvious down the line. I don't actually think that it's as long as the basic human rights are respected that kind of ignorance is very successful, because that kind of ignorance depends on the strong attachment to place and the immobility of people that wouldn't need to exist in a better society. Like there's a lot of poor communities, like in rural Oregon, it's a good place. There's poor communities where nobody can really afford to leave. They can't really afford to move to the city, and they don't really have the specialized skills for urban employment. And the rural jobs that used to pay well have gone away or are diminishing, right? So the few of them that still have good paying jobs have jobs like logger or whatever, right? And those jobs are slowly but surely going away, being replaced by automation or gone into obsolescence. So those rural people, they have this problem where the economy has fucked them over. Same thing happens with coal miners. The economy's fucked them over. They've committed their entire lives, they've built a skill set around a good or a way of life that the economy no longer needs. But the economy also says no support must be given to them to relocate. They have to stay here forever. So, of course, who could blame them for reactionarily thinking, well, the rural life is the best life. And, city people are garbage. And anyone that doesn't look like me is fine. They create these insular communities almost as a defense mechanism against
their self-worth or their diminished self-worth. Right.
And remember, too, that republics love these exploitable, ignorant populations. So they do everything they can to prop up these rural communities and keep them from collapsing totally, right? They throw money at them, They throw welfare and all these benefits at these small communities, which they try to deprive to the inner city, right, as best they can. But they're happy to throw them at rural areas, do all sorts of things to prop up these rural voters, to keep them from being absolutely starved out of their circumstances and desperate to move, not because they care about them, but because they're an easily exploitable minority of ignorant voters.
Well, I think it's time.
We are now out of time.
But you should come up with a name from your theory.
A name?
A name for it.
Well, I've already come up with a name. It's Digital Direct
Democracy.
Digital Direct.
You guys,
DDD.
You guys mentioned Oregon there, and it's I thought of the tyranny of the majority thing with Oregon. They had the gay marriage issue on the ballot measures. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And it came up year after year, and it got voted down every single time until they finally got one that worked. And I think that was more exploiting the ignorance of the current system, but that kind of goes towards me thinking, I'm worried about people's ignorance.
Well, hopefully, if we design the thing right, we won't have that problem. But, so Digital Direct Democratic... 3DE, Digital Direct Democratic Economics.
Okay. Sounds good.
So that's what we want to do, and
I'm sticking to it.
I have no idea how we get there, and that's pretty fucking grim. So thank you all for listening in, and hopefully we'll be with you again in another 6 months or so.